Is there a place and time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere or sometime along an indefinable line between the reasonable and the highly unlikely? Join us on a journey into the improbable.
Today's story, episode 234, Can Likelely, Accidental Interdimensional Drifter in Supreme Ruler. Read by Mitchel Tew. Opening and closing theme by Matthew Erdmann. The grass isn't always greener when you water it. The 30-foot Funseeker motorhome was feeling rather disappointed and distinctly put out. When its elderly owner, Mrs. Green, and her annoying neighbor, Ken Likelely, had come to pick it up, the motorhome had been envisioning a few weeks by the ocean with some of its buddies, like the big Airstream and 40-foot Roadmaster Supreme it had sat beside at the West Beach RV Park during last year's winter getaway. What it had never envisioned was finding itself alone, parked so it blocked the entrance to the Boardwalk Estates Community Center. To add to its embarrassment, its driver's side had been plastered with badly designed, hand-painted signs, such as "Freedom to plant what we want," "Keep our lawns glorious and green," and "Grass is beautiful," #Keep Boardwalk Estates green. All that sticky tape alone would take multiple car washes to remove, and, heaven forbid, some might even pull its paint off. Finally, it was the ignominious fact there were no hookups or other amenities a 1988 luxury model Funseeker 5000, such as itself, would normally expect, that almost made the motorhome collapse into a catatonic state. It just hoped none of its friends from the storage compound would drive by. "Hey, you can't get in this way," Mrs. Green yelled. She opened the passenger door, so it was impossible to squeeze between it and the brick wall. She would have parked closer, but she didn't want to scrape off the new mirror she had installed last season. The neighbor from 3 bays over had been trying to squeeze between the motorhome and the wall to get to the community center's entrance. "And no, before you ask, I can't move it," she explained. "It's some mechanical thingy. My neighbor, Mr. Likelely, has gone to get a part, or something." Where was Ken anyway, she wondered. Had he bailed on her? That would be just like him, all talk, no action. This whole blockade thingy had been his idea, so were the signs. It was a last, desperate act Ken had convinced her to help him with, to keep people from voting in favor of the inconceivably horrible zero-scaping bylaw their neighbor Leaf had proposed. She found a broom in the motorhome's tiny closet and used it to keep the passenger door wedged open, then looked out the front window, impatiently waiting for Ken to return. Elsewhere, in more or less the same universe, at that moment, the great Volcall token of supreme power was not having a good day. It had been taking a well-deserved 1,000 years off to admire its reflection in the pillars of creation over in the exclusive corner of the Eagle Nebula, and was seriously contemplating creating a new star in its name when it had been rudely ordered to return to Volk. Apparently, the current supreme ruler, the giant Dradian fern it had painstakingly recruited, had just abdicated along with a sizable chunk of the planet's wealth. Although no one had noticed until the chief of staff attempted to present the great fern with its monthly tribute of imported filtered water and high-quality fertilizers. The devious plant had gotten away cleanly, and now the Volcall were all in a tizzy, blaming each other for not picking up on the dark nature of their glorious leader, and, before civil war broke out, the great Volcall token of supreme power needed to choose a new ruler. Perturbed by the untimely interruption of its holidays, and wanting to get back to them as soon as possible, the Great Token picked an obscure world at random from an appendix to the imperial star charts which had fallen out onto the floor. The great wise chooser of galactic leaders picked up the chart, pinned it to a virtual wall, then, blindfolded, tossed a virtual dart at the thing, and found itself materializing on the sidewalk outside the Boardwalk Estates minimart. Wanting to get this over with as soon as possible, the great Volcall token of supreme power reached out to the mind of a local approaching citizen and turned itself into the most appealing object of that being's desire. Ken had needed a walk to get away from the stress of the protest. Some days, it felt like it was only him who truly appreciated the important place in history that closely shorn green grass played. Well-kept lawns were symbols of achievement, success, and status. Symbols he and Mrs. Green were not about to give up on after years of hard work fertilizing, weeding, watering, and mowing, just to succumb to the latest fad in urban landscape design, xeriscaping. It was all the rage now in the home and garden magazines. Articles on how to best remove your grass, choosing rocks to complement your siding, and finding drought-tolerant local plants with year-round interest had taken over. It was all xeriscaping all the time. Ken hated the word. It scratched at his tongue like baking soda toothpaste. That was bad enough, but now some of the more astute residents had realized the community center had a back door. They had phoned the caretaker to unlock it and were now on their way back to mount an assault. He had to come up with something fast, otherwise they would gain access to the building and be able to vote for the xeriscaping bylaw. Both Mrs. Green, her cat, Ken, and his Roomba had voted against it before blockading the front door, claiming Mrs. Green's 1988 motorhome had broken down. So the vote stood at 4 against, although the Roomba had briefly wavered, none for, and would stay that way if Ken had anything to do with it. Something sparkly caught his eye. It was small, brilliant, and unbelievably beautiful, lying abandoned on the sidewalk. Ken anxiously looked about to see if anyone had dropped it, then jealously scooped the Bobby Dazzler off the street. It was the missing head globe from his Lost in Space original series B9 robot model. Oddly, someone had turned it into a pendant. Ken couldn't believe his good luck. He put the thing around his neck, fully intending to liberate the head globe from its mounting and unite it with his rare B9 model. Ken felt a weird tingle in every nerve, then suddenly felt like he was master of the universe, which, unknowingly, he now was. A brilliant idea suddenly came to him, and he raced off to get his Yardmaster Elite sit-down lawnmower. Having located a new supreme ruler, or at least a being that met the minimal qualifications of being able to smile and wave at the same time, although that had never been confirmed about the fern, the great Volcall token of supreme power began filling out the extensive paperwork needed for the transition of power. The Volcall may not have been overly concerned about who was the current head of state, but they were hypersensitive about procedure. So, all the I's and T's needed dotting and crossing in a very specific and complicated order. The Great Token was in a bit of a hurry to get back to admiring itself, so it did not do the usual third check of the 1,000-page transition document. Hey, it decided, what was more important anyway? Meanwhile, it noted the new Supreme Leader was on the move.
Hey, Kenny dude, what's hanging, man?
Leaf, Ken's annoying vegan hippie neighbor, asked as he approached the back door of the Boardwalk Estates Community Center. Ken wasn't in a great mood. 2 people had managed to get through the back door before he blocked it using his Yardmaster Elite sit-down with the optional removable snowplow. He had attached the plow and managed to get its blade jammed into the doorframe. When the building caretaker came over to investigate the loud bang, Ken had claimed the machine had gotten away from him, and admittedly not being very athletic, he failed, despite his best effort, to catch up with the thing before it had miraculously wedged itself into the doorframe. The Yardmaster Elite grunted and sputtered a few times, trying to claim its innocence, but few these days understand the language of 2-stroke gas motors. So, its vehement denial of complicity was mistaken for a carburetor problem. Regardless, the vote for the zero-scaping bylaw now stood at 3 against, 2 for. Ken's Roomba's vote had been disqualified on a technicality. Leaf scratched at something under his headband, then examined Ken's lawnmower.
Mrs. Green's gas-guzzling motorhome is bogarting the front entrance, and she claims she can't get it started, he said. Unreal, man. I told her to get an EV makeover years ago. More reliable and no gnarly CO2. Now your biomass scarfing sit down? Really, man? Have you turned all tricky dick on me? I mean, your sit down and the motorhome at the same time? That's just too trippy a scene, dude, with the vote and all that today. And you being the only 2 with a hang-up about it and all.
Leaf shrugged.
Man, I told them they should have done it online.
Ken smiled conspiratorially and turned away to sit on his lawn tractor. What an unfortunate coincidence. I've called for a tow truck, but they won't be here until 9 tonight.
That's truly a bummer, Kenny dude, but I might have a righteous solution. I'm gonna cut out and get it, man.
By the time Leaf returned with Planet, his talking dog, and his lovingly built DIY EV Westphalia, a line of impatient Boardwalk Estates residents snaked around the building, ending at the back door. Apparently, Mrs. Green's immobile motorhome had convinced most people their chances were better with Ken's lawn tractor, which was now festooned with signs advising would-be voters of the potential decrease in property values zero-scaping would surely cause. Hashtag lawns add value, hashtag greengrass forever. Leaf wheeled silently up behind the crowd, which was busy insisting Ken get his Yardmaster Elite out of the doorframe or lose his discount at the weekly community flea market. The threat came from the president of the association, who was feeling quite put upon by the whole situation. The Yardmaster, for its part, wanted to crawl away and hide in the nearest tool shed, but Ken had removed its spark plug.
Kenny!
Leaf shouted over the crowd.
Problem solved, man. I've brought my 1979 VW camper, powered by good old soul.
Ken turned his attention away from stopping a senior who was attempting to use an old 2x4 to wedge the Yardmaster Elite out of the doorframe. What the? He cried at the sight of the solar panel-covered Westphalia.
The sun, dude,
Leaf proudly explained.
It's totally rad DIY Mother Earth loving tech. On full charge, this old beauty has twice the hauling power of that bogarting gas guzzler Miss Green's double parked outside the front.
Leaf hitched a chain to the back of the Westphalia, and the crowd moved aside as he hooked the other end to the back of the Yardmaster Elite. No! Ken yelled, desperately looking around for support. Leaf's feeding you misleading facts. Zero-scaping won't save water. It's all greenwashing. You'll use more to keep the dust down. No home buyer wants a place with piles of rocks and weeds in the front yard. It'll bring down property values and wreck the neighborhood. Imagine Boardwalk Estates without its iconic golf course green boulevards and lawns. It's what built this community, and that's why people want to live here, Ken cried, and added, and you'll need to reprint all the brochures, too. No one said anything. In truth, they seemed a bit unsure about what to do, although Ken thought Mr. Patel may have nodded in agreement. The Patels did have the third best lawn on the bay. Okay, there were a few weeds, but those, Ken assumed, had probably spread from Leaf's yard, the obvious source of all noxious plants in the neighborhood, so it wasn't Mr. Patel's fault. He made a note to somehow get the man inside so he could vote. Ken suddenly found himself separated from the yardmaster elite by a couple of angry residents from the street over. That bay had already started pulling its lawns out. He watched helplessly as Leaf finished attaching the chain and ran back to his solar-paneled eyesore. Mustering his last ounce of defiance, Ken yelled, "Stop!" so loudly that everyone, including Leaf, actually froze. At that moment, the great Volcall token of supreme power had just finished filing the transition documentation and was getting a bit impatient. It needed to crown the new ruler, and all this fussing over some local matter of no consequence to the grand imperial Volcall Empire was keeping it from getting back to the more important business of vacationing. Although it had to admit that, personally, it preferred a well-manicured golf course green lawn. Enough was enough, but it instinctively understood the new supreme leader would not go to the coronation until the matter at hand was resolved. So it opened a wormhole to the home world and brought through the flagship of the Volcall fleet to help ensure a speedy resolution in favor of the new supreme ruler. Suddenly, out of thin air, a huge, gleaming space battleship materialized above the Boardwalk Estates community center. Hanging distressingly low over the small crowd, it blocked out the sun, casting an intentionally menacing shadow, which its designer had won several awards for. Completely unaware of his newfound power, Ken pointed at Leaf. "Stop him!" Leaf was about to put the Westphalia into gear when he looked up, yelped, then scrambled out of the camper just before a blazing beam of light shot out from the underside of the Volcall battleship and instantly reduced the DIY EV to a pile of ecologically questionable ashes.
"Hey, man, no need to go all nuclear. I was going to move," Leaf complained. "There's plenty of parking space."
There was a sudden, loud chime which echoed off the back of the mini-mart on the far side of the parking lot.
"Good afternoon, creatures of tiny, insignificant world below. Heed the will of our new, glorious, supreme ruler."
The voice emanating from the spaceship was so intense the ground shook.
"I mean, soon to be crowned, what's its name again? Yeah, okay, got it. Are you sure? That doesn't sound like the name of a supreme, you know what, got it. Creatures of tiny, insignificant world below, heed the will of our soon-to-be glorious supreme ruler, the almighty, magnificent, truly incredible, Ken Likelely, whom you should now address as His Royal Highness Ken, or we will be forced to wipe your worthless mudball from existence," the voice thundered. "Now, if you don't mind, Your Majesty, we really need to get back to Volk. We have a live stream set up for your coronation. 90% of the population has logged in to watch. The other 10% who haven't have already been sent to the mines. However, the cute kitten videos will only hold the audience for so long. Time is of the essence. You must come with us now, O great leader."
As the echo finally died away, everyone took their hands off their ears and gawked at Ken. Ken, slack-jawed, gawked at the giant ship, then suddenly seemed to realize something. They were talking about him. Him, Ken Likelely, Planning Department Clerk Level 4. One part of his brain always knew he'd move up in the department, maybe to Processing Clerk Level 2, just not Supreme Ruler of an alien planet. That part of his brain quite liked the idea. Another, the part which was a lover of golf course green lawns, the part which had convinced him and Mrs. Green to blockade the community center to stop all that madness around zero-scaping, decided it was going to stand its ground and directed Ken's mouth to respond. I can't just leave, he shouted back, waving his hand to make sure the aliens could see who he was, which may have been redundant. After all, they had selected him. At least not until after 8 tonight.
Oh, is that you, Great One?
The voice sounded disappointed.
We were hoping for something a bit taller and maybe a bit less pear-shaped. Can you smile and wave?
Ken smiled, then waved.
I mean at the same time,
the great voice corrected. Ken did his best.
Okay, good enough for me. Now, what happens at 8, oh glorious one?
That's when the voting for the zero-scaping bylaw closes, Ken explained. The great ship remained silent. You know, rocks, Ken added. Gravel and noxious weeds instead of luxurious, soft, and welcoming green grass. These people have all been brainwashed by that guy. Ken pointed to Leaf, who was cautiously examining the toxic ash of his DIY EV camper. He's been greenwashing them into believing it'll help save the planet. Some foolishness about using less water and no fertilizer. I don't know.
The great voice of the ship mused. I do enjoy the luscious grass around the Imperial Palace compound. It's so soft on the feet. Green is such a pretty color, isn't it? Although I hear it takes all the water of the neighboring star system to keep it so. But it's such a small price to pay, isn't it? I digress. There is no problem. Decree everyone must have a lawn. Simple, right? Problem solved. Now, let's get moving.
I have the power to do that? Ken asked.
Of course, Your Greatness. You are the Supreme Ruler, Master of everything, Commander-in-Chief of the Great Volcall Fleet, and majority shareholder in a chain of themed fast food restaurants which feature interiors based on our mighty battleships. So, of course you can do that. But, please, sir, can we just destroy the whole planet instead? It's such a small one, really quite insignificant. No one is going to miss it. The gang on board here hasn't had the chance to play with the big planet-killing gun in ages, and the trip here was so boring. In fact, our last 10 missions were exactly the same. This is a warship, and we haven't blown anything up in far too long. Just a little fun, please. It will build morale and start your reign on a positive note, and the vid will have legs on social media. You see, I've been losing followers recently. Not enough exciting planetary destruction and stuff blowing up. Vids of singing nebula and dancing quasars just don't cut it these days.
Stunned, Ken said nothing.
Oh, come on, sir. Let us have a little fun. These diplomatic missions are so stodgy. At least we could blow up this planet's moon, or a few asteroids on our way back. It will really make the crew happy. What do you think?
How would that decree thingy work? Ken finally asked.
You just proclaim everyone must have grass, and we'll have a fleet of our best battle bots.
There was some mumbling in the background.
You're telling me you forgot them? Well, what did we bring? Really? Well, they just have to make do, won't they? And don't expect a bonus. I don't care that the crew will complain on the way back. As I was saying, we will leave a fleet of highly aggressive and scary robotic laundry drones to ensure your subjects on this world comply. They're really quite ruthless when they're on the trail of a missing sock. Now, can we get going?
Ken thought about it. So, if I leave to go to this coronation thingy and be crowned, or whatever, supreme ruler, while I'm away, these scary laundry drones will make sure the zero-scaping bylaw doesn't pass and force everyone to plant grass in their front yard.
That's the idea. It will require lots and lots of fertilizer and herbicide to keep those nasty weeds away. Oh, we're buying options in agrochemical companies right now. Always good to get the jump on the next big boom when you have inside knowledge, right? We couldn't corner the market on water, but there will be huge demand. It'll be a future area to develop a monopoly in. Now, we really need to leave, sir.
A smile slowly grew on Ken's face. Really? You're not putting me on?
Really? Just decree it so we can go.
The great voice was getting irritated.
Who picked this indecisive cretin anyways?
Can I have a second to come up with the right wording? Ken said, furrowing his brow to think. I don't want this to turn out like one of those 3 wishes things. Did you notice the pendant around Ken's neck? Planet barked at Leaf. Leaf was still distracted, sifting through the ashes of his Westphalia.
What a drag, man. It was my prize 79 wheels. The last year for the German-built bay window, too. Total bummer. Zapped by a Volkalt battlecruiser. Who would have guessed? Do they have a hang-up for EVs or something?
He stopped sifting and looked up at the giant spaceship.
Hey, this ain't that thing seen. What's it doing here, planet?
They've come to collect their new supreme leader, and somehow Ken's got the token of ultimate power around his neck, Planet growled. And he's about to literally astroturf the entire world. Distract him? Leaf nodded and waved to get Ken's attention.
Kenny, dude, can we jaw for a second about compensation?
He nodded at the pile of ashes.
Before you get all stoked, decreeing some hairy thing about eco-unfriendly grass, man? Oh, great one, the ship's voice pleaded. We really don't have time for this.
Ken hesitated, and, in that instant, Planet leapt for Ken's throat. A few people screamed, others cheered. Too late, Ken tried to duck. Planet grabbed the pendant in her mouth, breaking the cheap dime store chain it was strung on. Damn, the great token thought, as it was carried away by the thieving alien canine. I probably should have shelled out for a better quality chain. But, it decided, maybe this was for the best. It wasn't convinced Ken was going to cut it as the supreme ruler. The giant fern at least had been decisive. As Planet raced around the side of the Boardwalk Estates Community Center, the immense blasters mounted to the alien spacecraft felt they should be doing something to resolve the commotion on the ground, and waved around uncertainly, trying to figure out what would be best to shoot. Finding nothing, and clearly unable to resist an opportunity to blow something up, they somewhat disappointingly focused on the recycling bin at the far end of the parking lot. With immense flurry and much ado, the recycle bin's last thought was a sense of relief at not having to send its load of toxic plastic food containers from the mini-mart around the corner to a third-world country for recycling. At the very instant the thought formed, the bin and its contents were harmlessly converted into their constituent atoms. The Volcals were, if nothing else, very fussy about leaving a mess in their destructive wake. After all, that was not part of their brand story, which they were extremely protective of, because one of the galaxy's most exclusive marketing agencies had charged them the equivalent of several planetary GNPs to create it, and right now they couldn't afford a rebrand, given the state the giant Dradian fern had left the royal treasury in. Meanwhile, Planet had made it to the front of the community center before the blasters began waving around again, looking for another target. The battleship's captain was considering just destroying the entire world and claiming the whole thing was an accident, then taking control of the great Volcal Empire themselves, because who was going to say otherwise to a sociopathic, power-mad, self-inflated oligarch with their finger on the button? Plus, the captain had the foresight to already have several influencers busy in the bowels of the great battleship working on the social media strategy for just such an outcome. Planet stopped and looked around, sensing it was now or never. She whipped her head about and released the pendant, which flew up and immediately got snagged on the satellite TV dish on the top of Miss Green's mobile home. Planet knew the travel home was the only other entity who fully appreciated what the stakes were. The great Volcal token of supreme power agreed and was happy about this accidental turn of events. The Funseeker Elite Travel Coach, a luxury model in its day with top-of-the-line everything, had always assumed it would one day achieve great things. So, naturally, becoming supreme ruler of the galaxy seemed kind of inevitable to it, and, given it doubted Miss Green's pension would be enough to keep it in the condition it deserved, it was about time someone recognized its true pedigree. Certainly, being the supreme ruler beat sitting around in a storage lot for 50 weeks a year. The motorhome already had plans to create exclusive luxury parking lots with full hookups at Volk's best beaches, and inviting a few select friends to join it as an inner ruling circle. It was eyeing a big road king as right-hand tyrant. So, it eagerly accepted the token's largesse and immediately disappeared in a sparkle of transporter light, leaving Mrs. Green sitting on the ground in a pile of hand-painted signs, looking bewildered and more than a little embarrassed as the crowd surged past her into the community center to vote. Makeshift Stories is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. To get other great APN podcasts, head over to albertapodcastnetwork.com, where you'll find Putting It Together. Join Kyle Marshall and a guest as they take a deep dive into a different Stephen Sondheim song each episode. This episode of Makeshift Stories is brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network. APN connects Alberta podcast listeners to businesses and organizations in Alberta and around the world. Podcasters in our network are smart, creative, and engaging, providing an excellent way to reach local listeners and those around the world who enjoy our shows. Send us an email at hello@albertapodcastnetwork.com and we'll help you meet your goals. This episode of Makeshift Stories is also brought to you by the Edmonton Community Foundation. The Edmonton Community Foundation's well-endowed podcast explores the impact of passionate people who are working to make Edmonton a strong, vibrant city to live in. Episodes tell stories about donors and what inspires their generosity. You will hear about the people who use the Foundation's support to build and sustain social initiatives, empower youth, strengthen arts and culture, and so much more. Edmonton is full of passionate people dedicated to building a vibrant community. The Well-Endowed podcast explores the impact that these municipal champions have. The Well-Endowed podcast explores the impact that these municipal champions have. Subscribe at thewellendowedpodcast.com. Makeshift Stories is released around the beginning and middle of the month. This month's story was written by Alan V. Hare and read by Mitchel Tew. Opening and closing themes were composed and recorded by Matthew Erdmann. If you'd like to connect with us, please send an email to makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. Links to both are in the show notes. You can help us out by getting your friends to subscribe or follow wherever they listen to audio. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution no derivative license, which means you are free to share our stories. Just remember to credit us and don't alter anything.